Out here, across the endless miles of the American wilderness, where the desert night swallows every sound and the sky feels far too big to be safe. Some people choose to live small, inside the thin metal walls of an RV, chasing peace, chasing freedom. But not everyone who goes camping comes back the same. They talk about knocks in the night, gentle at first, then patient, about shadows standing still just beyond the firelight, about the moment they realize the breathing they hear in the dark isn't theirs. Tonight you'll hear the story of Carter Hayes, a man who doesn't just tell stories about fear, he lives inside them. A traveler, a storyteller, a YouTuber who explores the chilling truths behind real RV horror encounters across America. But behind every story, behind every camera angle and flicker of firelight, lies something Carter never meant to reveal. He once believed that filming fear could keep it away, that recording it could make it safe. But some fears don't vanish when you speak them aloud. They listen, they follow, they learn your name. So tonight, turn off your lights, sit back, and listen carefully. Because this isn't just a scary story, it's the beginning of every knock Carter Hayes has ever heard. I never meant for fear to become my career. Yet here I am, standing in the middle of the desert night with a camera in my hand, rehearsing stories I never thought I'd be brave enough to tell. My name is Carter Hayes. I'm 38 years old, born in the flatlands of Illinois, and I make videos about real-life scares that RV campers face in the United States. A strange profession, I know, but behind every chilling story I upload, behind every eerie thumbnail that makes you wonder who or what is lurking beyond the campfire light is a truth I've learned the hard way. Fear isn't invented, it's discovered. When people click on my channel, they assume I'm just spinning tall tales, adding creepy music and dramatic lighting to normal campsite mishaps. I wish that were the case. My stories come from a place that changed me, molded me into someone who listens differently when the wind hits the side of an RV, someone who watches shadows longer than anyone should. This channel didn't start as entertainment. It started as a diary of warnings, a record of what I lived through so others would know when to trust their instincts before something out there decides to make a lesson of them too. Every storyteller has an origin story. Mine begins on a solo trip I took when I was 29, long before I owned a decent camera or a microphone good enough to pick up the whisper of a twig snapping outside the RV door. I had just bought my first used fifth wheel and towed it west to New Mexico, determined to experience the open freedom that RV magazines shone in glossy spreads, sunlight hitting sandstone, hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, and a whole new identity found on the road. I thought fear was for kids and horror movies, not for someone with a toolbox and roadside assistance. I was wrong. It was one night outside a remote BLM campsite near Shiprock that changed everything. I'd been filming small clips for Instagram, just trying to show family and friends that life on the road wasn't reckless like they feared. I even gave the camera a cheesy grin, talking about how beautiful the Milky Way looked above me, how the silence felt like a reset button for my brain. And it did, right until the silence ended. There was a knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just a single tap on the back of the RV. I froze. The camera was still rolling, though the frame caught only the campfire flickering. My hand hovered in midair, my voice trapped somewhere between my throat and my lungs. Out in the wilderness like that, a knock means something has already found you. It knows you're there. And you don't know what it is. I brushed it off as a shifting panel, a branch maybe, something mundane. Denial is a powerful survival instinct disguised as logic. But then it knocked again. Same rhythm, same spot. I remember the sound, like someone dragged their knuckles slowly across metal before tapping lightly twice. A signature. A request for acknowledgement. Any seasoned camper will tell you, if anything wants your attention that badly, it's best not to give it. So I didn't. I stayed seated by the fire, eyes locked on the darkness behind my rig. I've since learned that the dark is not empty. It is crowded with curiosity. That night, fear introduced itself to me, not with teeth or claws, but with possibility. I lay in bed afterward, too awake, listening to every groan the RV made, the wind brushing fabric, the tiny clicks of cooling metal, the thunk of something much heavier stepping somewhere close. I didn't film those moments. I didn't speak. I just promised myself that I'd be ready the next time. I'd document everything, because fear becomes less dangerous when you shine a light on it. Or so I thought. Years later, I understand that documenting something doesn't keep it away. It only makes the experience live longer. When I started telling these stories online, people asked where I got my ideas. They asked if I researched paranormal encounters or local legends. They asked if the knocks were just a raccoon, if the footsteps were a deer, if I ever considered the scientific explanations before hitting upload. And I get it. People want to believe fear has a logical origin. Our brains cling to reason like it's a life raft in deep water. But here's the truth I learned out there. The most unsettling things aren't supernatural. They're perfectly possible. A stranger walking the perimeter of your campsite without a flashlight. A lone figure standing among the trees long after the campgrounds close. A handprint appearing high up on your RV door, too high for any animal. Not fresh enough to track, not old enough to ignore. Fear builds itself out of what we can explain and what we hope we never have to. I started collecting stories from fellow RVers, truck stop run-ins, sightings in remote desert boondocking sites, late-night warnings from park rangers who refuse to explain what exactly they're warning you against. The kind of tales told in quiet tones around a campfire that snap shut when someone unfamiliar approaches. The kind of stories whispered by people who never wanted to be in them. Those stories became the backbone of this channel. But there's another layer, the part no one sees, the part I usually avoid talking about, the part where I go back to those places alone, trying to understand why the fear happened, what caused it, and whether whatever knocked that night is still out there waiting for someone like me to listen. The truth is, I don't just tell these stories. I investigate them. I live them. I let the fear in. And each time I pack up my RV and head toward a new campsite with too few neighbors and too many hiding places, I remind myself that I'm doing this so others don't have to take that same risk blindly. Maybe that's the motivation beneath the horror. I want you to enjoy your adventures, but I also want you to keep your eyes wide open after the fire dies down. Because if you've never parked your RV in the open desert where the sky feels too big and the ground feels too quiet, you don't yet understand how loud breathing can sound when you realize it isn't yours. That's where this story truly begins. Not with a knock, but with a question that hit me years later. What if sharing these stories doesn't protect people? What if it invites something else? The bigger my channel grew, the more messages I received. Stories from viewers who began hearing knocks after watching my videos. Subscribers waking to find their RV doorlessly open. People reporting the same patterns, the same timing, the same dreadful curiosity tapping into their nights as if the fear traveled through the screen to find them. I've spent too long trying to convince myself these parallels are coincidence. But storytelling has power. The kind of power I might not fully control. And that power keeps leading me back into the wild, into the places where stories begin as simple camping trips and end as evidence that someone or something we can't name is wandering just beyond the lantern light. Tonight, as I speak this into the microphone, I'm camped alone again. This time in the pine shadow of northern Arizona, where old forest roads branch like capillaries toward forgotten fire rings and rust-eaten picnic tables. I chose this spot specifically. A story was born here once. A bad one. I want to know why. My RV is parked beside a clearing where the ground dips unexpectedly as if something huge beneath it once inhaled. It smells like damp wood and old secrets. The pines sway, whispering in a language I swear I could almost understand if I listened too closely. And I do listen. I always listen. Because tonight I'm not just making a video, I'm exposing the process. The scares you see, They aren't fiction polished into a story. They are truths, rough and jagged. And the process of turning reality into nightmare starts the moment fear arrives uninvited. I think it's already here. I hear the first knock. It's subtle, a soft tap against the rear panel like a branch nudged by a careful hand, but there are no trees close enough to reach the rig. I know because I made sure of it. I chose this exact pull-through spot because nothing should be touching my RV except cold air and nerves. Still, there it is again. Tap, a pause, tap, tap. Patterns never comfort me. They mean intention. I set the microphone down gently, not wanting to let the fear in my movements bleed through the audio. But my breathing, I can't control how loud that gets. Inside this metal shell, every inhale sounds like a warning siren. I remind myself what brought me here. A month ago, a viewer sent me a shaky message, voice trembling, words slippery with panic. He'd camped here, right where I'm parked now, said he woke at 3:17 a.m. to the same tapping. He thought someone was outside, maybe a lost hiker, maybe a prankster, until he pulled the blinds and saw no one, just pine trees bowing in the windless dark. He tried to record it, he tried to speak about it, but each time he hit upload, something corrupted the file, as if the night had a right to erase its own evidence. I didn't believe him. Not completely, but I've learned enough to never ignore the fear in someone's voice. Fear tells the truth before logic catches up, so I came here to find the truth. Tap, I swallow hard. Courage feels thick in my throat, barely moving. My flashlight sits beside the door like a challenge, but I'm not ready to step into the night. Not yet. Instead, I sit down at the tiny dinette and press my palm flat against the tabletop, grounding myself. The Formica is cool, steady. My hand is not. It trembles just enough to embarrass me if anyone else were watching. But that's the thing about fear. It makes you feel watched even when you're alone. I whisper into the recorder, trying to keep my voice even. This is how the process starts. Before the story becomes a story, it begins with something small, a sound, a shift, a question. What is outside? The temptation is always to rationalize. Wind, temperature change, an animal. I go through the list automatically. It's my mental safety checklist. But each explanation falls apart in sequence. Wind, the air is still. Pines freeze like they're mid-thought. Metal cooling, the rig's been parked for hours. It should be silent by now. Animal, maybe. But animals skitter, scratch, shuffle. They don't knock politely. My viewers always ask how I keep my voice steady when narrating. They assume I'm performing bravery. They don't realize the fear comes first. The storytelling is survival, stringing words together so the mind doesn't unravel. I breathe out, a slow, shaky exhale. Then something new happens. No more tapping, instead dragging. A fingertip, a nail. Something scrapes across the back hatch, long and patient. Slow enough that I picture the motion perfectly in my mind, someone tracing the outline of the door, mapping the way in. I press my spine into the cushioned bench, as if flattening myself could make me invisible. The scrape shifts, now moving along the side toward the window nearest my bed. Each inch it travels, my heartbeat punches harder inside my ribs. Fear is percussion. I can't stay seated anymore. My legs act on instinct, pushing me upright even though I don't know what I'm planning to do. Fight, run, hide, all three feel impossible. But that scraping, it stops. Dead silence. The worst kind. I've learned that silence doesn't mean safety. Silence is the inhale before the scream. The air grows heavy with stillness. Too heavy. I feel it press against my chest, making every breath a negotiation. A whisper escapes me, quiet, involuntary. What do you want? I hate that I spoke. I hate that the question feels like permission. When you ask fear a question, it might answer. The reply doesn't come in sound first, but in smell. A sour metallic scent drifts through the air vents. Something like soil after rain, but rotten. Something that has been buried too long. I pinch my nose, but it doesn't go away. It grows thicker, closer. The viewer who contacted me mentioned this same thing. He said the smell was the part that scared him most. It meant it wasn't just sound. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't the wind. It was presence. Slowly, carefully, I take a step toward the rear window. The flashlight is still there by the door. I could grab it. I should grab it. But the thought of turning on a light feels dangerous, like it would confirm that something can see me. I reach instead for my camera, my old DSLR that's seen more horror than any piece of equipment should. The weight of it in my hands gives me the illusion of purpose, like documenting the moment could make it rational. I edge toward the window. Every step creaks, each noise a betrayal. The blinds are closed, thin plastic slats that do nothing but delay the inevitable. I raise one finger and slip it between the blinds, easing a narrow gap open. My skin prickles. My breath holds. Outside, the clearing is swallowed by darkness, so complete it feels like the world beyond the window doesn't exist. But the trees remain, their outlines barely visible, jagged silhouettes against a sky with too few stars. Then movement. A shadow glides behind the pines. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate, as if it knows exactly how visible it should be to keep me guessing. I forget how to blink. My camera lens reflects a tiny glimmer of light, and that's when I see it. No shape, no face, just a darker dark moving between the trunks. It stops, and even from this distance, even without features or form, I feel its attention harden into something sharp. It sees me, my throat tightens, panic urges me to drop the blinds and hide, but fear commands stillness. Fear has rules. If you move, you're prey. The shape slips forward again, closer. It pauses at the edge of the tree line. I strain to find details, anything to prove this is just a person in the wrong place at the wrong time. But what I see doesn't match any comforting explanation. It's tall, too tall, and wrong in all the human ways. Its head tilts with a curious jerk, like a question mark bending to look back at the sentence it ended. Suddenly, the entire RV shifts, a faint but undeniable jolt. Something pressed against the other side. Something strong. My hand flies to the window frame to keep my balance. The camera nearly slips from my grasp. No more waiting. No more observing. It's time to move. I back away from the window, heart slamming a frantic tempo. Each step takes effort. My legs feel underwater, resisting escape. I reach the door and grab the flashlight with shaking fingers. Choices scatter in my mind like scared birds. Do I run? Drive away in the dark? Stay inside and pray the locks hold? I choose the one option fear almost never wants: confrontation. I unlock the door. As the latch clicks, the noise cuts through the quiet like a dare. The air outside feels colder when I crack the door open, as if the night itself inhales at the sight of me. I swing the light outward. The beam slices across the clearing. Empty. The tree line stands still. The shadow I saw is gone. Then the knock comes again, directly behind me. Inside the RV. For one impossible heartbeat, I can't move. The flashlight beam trembles in my hand, shaking the night into jagged fragments. That knock, inside the RV, defies every rule of safety I've ever learned out here. Doors latch, windows lock, walls protect. That's how it's supposed to work. But something already crossed the boundary. I spin back toward the doorway, heart pounding so loud it feels like an alarm inside my chest. The interior lights glow warm and harmless, an insult to the terror crawling up my spine. Everything looks unchanged. My boots by the bed, the folded map on the counter, the microphone still recording on the dinette. But the silence is no longer empty. It's listening. I step inside, shutting the door quietly behind me. My breath fogs the air. For a split second, I think the temperature dropped drastically. Then I realize it's shaking breath, too fast, too shallow. The knock came from the bedroom area. Near the rear hatch I had been too afraid to check before. I force myself forward, each step splintering my courage. My flashlight beam cuts across the bed. The covers are rumpled like something crawled out. The closet door stands slightly ajar, though I know I closed it when I came in. A faint line of darkness peers through the gap like an eye waiting to blink. I raise the camera in my free hand. It feels absurd, filming what I desperately hope not to see. But this is the moment everyone thinks they want when they ask, how do you make your stories so real? I never tell them the truth. I don't make them real. They make me honest. I reach toward the closet. My hand closes around the small metal knob. Cold. Too cold. My stomach churns. Just open it. Just do it. Just tap. From the bathroom door behind me. That's it. Fear overtakes rationality in a violent surge. I abandon the closet, twisting toward the noise. The camera bumps against my chest as I grip the bathroom handle and shove the door open with far more force than intended. Light floods the tiny room, harsh, white, revealing. The toilet lid sits open. The mirror reflects only my own wide, terrified eyes. Nothing else. The emptiness feels like mockery, like the space itself is laughing at me. But then I hear it. Not a knock, not a scrape. Breathing, low and steady, coming from somewhere behind the walls, like something exhaling against the hollow veins of the RV. I step back, bumping into the counter, flashlight beam bouncing frantically across every surface. The breathing stops. Silence presses close again. I whisper through clenched teeth, too scared to raise my voice. What do you want from me? And finally, from right beneath my feet, an answer arrives. 3 slow knocks on the RV floor. My body reacts before my mind catches up. I bolt for the door, throwing it open so hard it crashes against the outer panel. The desert air hits me like a flood of sanity. My lungs grab the cold, and the cold grabs back. I don't bother grabbing anything else. Not the camera bag, not the food, not even my wallet. My keys are in my pocket. Thank God. And I slam myself into the truck, twisting them with frantic desperation. The engine turns over. Lights blaze. Tires spin through gravel. I rip out of the clearing, headlights carving a desperate path through the trees as the RV jerks behind me. I watch the rearview mirror. I can't help it. Terror demands witness. In that mirror, the clearing doesn't empty itself quietly. The dark outline stands where my RV had been parked, tall, rigid, wrong. Then it steps forward once, and the headlights catch a glint, something reflective and wet sliding down its elongated hands. And a face, no, not a face, just the absence of one. I don't wait for more. My foot slams the accelerator. Branches claw at the sides of my truck like the forest itself trying to hold me back. The dirt road seems narrower, meaner. Every bump challenges the hitch. The RV rattles violently behind me, but I can't slow down. Not while that thing is still back there, maybe still watching. My breath becomes sharp, metallic gasps. The headlights feel like the only thing separating me from being swallowed whole. Minutes or hours blur into one long escape. Only when paved road finally appears beneath my tires do I realize I've been crying. 2 hot tracks cutting down my cheeks, soaked into my beard. I don't stop driving until the first faint hint of dawn turns the eastern horizon blue. I pull into a random gas station parking lot. For a long time, I just sit there gripping the wheel, shaking harder than the engine idling beneath me. The camera still hangs against my chest. I finally click it off. Fear doesn't disappear when the sun comes up. It just hides in new places. That was 3 years ago. That night became the unspoken boundary line between the life I had and the life I chose. The life where fear wasn't just a story to share. It was a source material I never wanted but can't let go of. Since then, every time I make a video, I go back into that emotional territory. I knock on the door of something I don't understand, and it always answers. Viewers ask me why I still camp alone, why I keep returning to dangerous places, why I tell stories that seem to lure strange things into the lives of people who just want to enjoy the outdoors. They think I'm fearless. Truth is, I owe fear everything. Fear saved me that night. Fear forced me to run. Fear keeps me alive. But fear also follows. There's something I haven't admitted until now. Not in any video, not in any live stream, not even to people who know the full truth of what I saw. The knocks didn't stop. Not after New Mexico. Not after Arizona. Not even at home. Sometimes, when editing footage late into the night, I hear tapping under the desk, a rattling vent, a dragging noise across the back porch, always when the story becomes most intense, as if fear itself gets hungry for attention. I used to think my storytelling helped people avoid dangers on the road. Now, I'm not so sure my videos prevent fear. Maybe they spread it. But here's the lesson I can't ignore anymore. Fear doesn't show up because you're weak. Fear shows up because something wants to be acknowledged. And when you acknowledge fear, you give it a place to stay. I've accepted that now. I let it stay. I invite it. I turn on the camera, I hit record, I speak the words aloud. I give form to shadows so the world can see them too. You wanted to know how I create such realistic horror? I live through it first. And as long as people keep listening, as long as people keep watching, something out there will keep giving me stories. Even now, as I finish speaking this into the recorder, the air vent behind me puffs out another cold breath. My skin tightens like it's trying to flee from my bones. Fear is here. It always is. It learned my name long before I introduced myself. So here's my final warning. Not as a storyteller, but as someone who has seen what knocks back when you knock first. When you hear a sound outside your RV at night, don't look. Don't listen. Don't speak to it. Because fear wants conversation, and once you respond, the story continues. And it isn't just mine anymore. I've always loved the sound of engines that hum instead of roar. There's something comforting about the old Volkswagen engines. The soft rhythm, the faint sputter when you ease up a hill. It's not power you feel through your bones, it's personality. My 1976 Westphalia camper, sage green with a rusted pop top and a smell like pine needles and gasoline, had been my escape vehicle for the past 3 summers. Every weekend I could steal from work, I'd point it toward the mountains and drive until the noise in my head softened. That van had carried me through heartbreak, through job changes, through lonely nights parked under big skies where the stars looked like they were burning holes straight through the dark. That was before Winding Gap. I'd heard about it from a man I met at a rest stop somewhere outside Knoxville. He said it was a forgotten campground tucked into a narrow pass between 2 ridgelines of the Smokies. Used to be a ranger station there, he'd told me, before the birds took it back. I thought he was talking about wildlife, but the way he said birds lingered. When I asked for directions, he just shrugged, said it wasn't on maps anymore. But if I followed Route 19A past the old gas station with the white deer mural, I'd see a dirt track with a crooked sign that read, Winding Gap, half buried in kudzu. Don't stay after dark, he added, lighting a cigarette. That's when they start counting. I laughed it off then. You hear a lot of strange advice when you're traveling alone in a van. Everyone wants to warn you about something, the weather, the roads, the people. But that phrase stuck in my head the whole drive up, when they start counting. I told myself it was some local superstition, like the tales about the Bell Witch or the Cherokee spirits said to haunt certain valleys. But when I pulled into Winding Gap late that Friday afternoon, it didn't feel like any campsite I'd ever been to. The air was different there. Thick, almost static. The trees leaned in close, their branches knitted so tight they filtered the daylight into a greenish haze. There were 3 old campsites visible from the dirt road, each overgrown with waist-high grass and scattered beer cans from decades past. My van's tires crunched over gravel that hadn't been disturbed in years. I cut the ignition and the sudden silence pressed in like a weight. That's when I first heard them. The crows. They weren't distant. They were everywhere, perched along the tree line, lined on the roof of the old ranger cabin, filling the air with that harsh, uneven chorus. It wasn't the usual pattern of caws you hear on hikes or in city parks. It was slower, deliberate. Like 1 would call, then 3 would answer, then 2, then 1 again. A pattern. I remember thinking absurdly that it sounded like counting. I told myself it was just nerves from being alone. I'd spent enough nights solo camping to know that isolation can mess with your senses. I set up camp beside the van, unfolded my lawn chair, and heated up a can of chili on the portable stove. The sun slid low behind the ridge, and the air turned cold fast. The smell of pine sap and rust drifted in with the wind. I sat there watching the treetops sway and listening to that rhythmic cawing, trying to convince myself it was just nature doing what nature does. Around dusk, another vehicle came rattling up the old road, a beat-up red Toyota Tacoma with a camper shell. The driver was a woman, probably in her mid-30s, with dark hair tied in a braid and an expression that didn't soften when she smiled. She parked near the cabin, got out, and gave me a nod. I waved, grateful for company. "Didn't think anyone else knew about this place," I said. "Most don't," she replied. Her voice had that steady, mountain calm to it. She introduced herself as Claire. She said she used to camp here years ago when the park still maintained the trailhead nearby. But after the collapse, they closed it off. "The collapse?" I asked. She hesitated. "Landslide. Took out part of the ridge back in '09, brought down a bunch of nesting sites. Crows came in afterward. Thousands of them." She looked toward the tree line. "Locals started calling them the counters." I half laughed. "The what?" "They say the crows here count things. People, mostly." It sounded ridiculous, but she wasn't smiling. She started unpacking her gear, old canvas bags, a tent that had seen better days, back a small wood stove. I offered to share some chili, but she declined. Said she brought her own food. Said she didn't like to eat after dark in places like this. I thought she was being dramatic. But later that night, when the last bit of daylight drained from the sky and the forest turned black, I began to understand what she meant. I was lying in the van, wrapped in my sleeping bag, trying to read by the light of a lantern. The crows had quieted just after sunset, leaving behind an eerie absence of sound. No crickets, no wind, nothing, just a faint pop of cooling metal from the van's engine. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the trees came a single caw. Then two, then three. Pause. Then one again. It repeated. I counted along in my head. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. It went on like that for almost 10 minutes before I finally sat up and shut off the lantern. The night outside was so dark I could barely see the outline of the trees. But then I saw movement, a figure standing near the old ranger cabin, barely visible against the pale siding. It was Claire. She was facing the woods, perfectly still. I slid open the van door quietly, stepped out barefoot onto the cold dirt. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain before a storm, though the sky was clear. I whispered her name, but she didn't move. I took a few steps closer and realized she was counting under her breath, her lips moving in rhythm with the crows. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. I called out again, louder this time. She turned, her eyes wide, as if I'd broken some invisible thread. "Don't do that," she hissed. "Don't interrupt them." "Interrupt who?" "The counters," she said. "You can't stop them once they start. They're keeping track." I didn't know what to say. My heart was hammering. She stared past me into the dark, then backed slowly toward her truck. "You should leave before dawn," she said. "They only need to finish once." Then she climbed into the cab and locked the doors. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat of my van, hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes on the trees. Every time I thought the counting had stopped, it would start again, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, always in that same broken rhythm. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was echoes, maybe more than one bird calling from different directions. But the sound felt intentional, measured. It wasn't random. When the first light of morning finally touched the ridge, Claire's truck was gone. No tracks, no sound of her leaving. Just gone. I told myself she probably left early. Maybe she didn't sleep either. Maybe she just decided to drive out before sunrise. But when I stepped out and looked toward where she'd camped, I noticed something on the ground near the cabin, a small pile of stones arranged in a perfect circle, with a single black feather laid in the center. And on the side of the cabin, scratched into the wood just beneath the window, were numbers. 4 of them, fresh, like someone had carved them with a knife during the night. 3411. At first, I thought it was a date, or maybe just random graffiti. But when I turned back toward my van, I saw that the windshield was covered in tiny, muddy prints, bird tracks, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, like something had been walking across it over and over again in circles. I don't scare easy, but that morning I packed my gear in silence, barely breathing, afraid that any sudden sound might stir the air again. I started the van and drove down the dirt track without even stopping to check my map. The crows followed for nearly a mile, gliding from tree to tree above me, their calls echoing through the gap. But as the forest thinned and sunlight broke through, They fell away. The noise stopped. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. I made it back to Route 19A by mid-morning, still shaken, but trying to convince myself that what I'd experienced could be explained. The crows, just birds. The numbers, maybe Claire had carved them before I even arrived. The prints, mud from branches brushing against the windshield overnight. I told myself these things over and over as I drove toward the nearest town, but every explanation felt forced, like I was rehearsing excuses for something I didn't understand. When I finally reached the first gas station I'd seen in hours, I pulled in and killed the engine. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead felt unnatural after a night of silence. A man in his 60s was sweeping the lot, the kind of guy who looked like he'd been rooted there his whole life. I walked up, asked if he knew of a place called Winding Gap. He stopped sweeping and gave me a look that was too long to be casual. "Why'd you go up there?" I shrugged. "Just camping. Thought it was an old park site." He nodded slowly, pressing his tongue against his cheek before answering. "Used to be. Rangers pulled out after the accident." "What accident?" He looked out toward the highway. "You ever notice how quiet it gets up that way?" I told him I had. Landslide came down one night, middle of a storm, brought half the ridge with it, buried 2 rangers alive in the lower station. Folks said you could still hear them calling out for days after, before the dirt settled. When the crows came, people said they were counting souls, counting what was left. I stood there, the chill creeping up my spine despite the warm morning. He must have noticed the look on my face because his voice softened. "You see them, didn't you?" I nodded. "Then don't go back. They don't forget faces." He went back to sweeping, like that was the end of it. I thanked him, bought some coffee, and sat in my van staring at the steering wheel. My hands were still trembling. I thought about driving straight home, but there was something that didn't sit right. Claire? She'd been there that night. Solid. Real. She'd told me not to interrupt them, not to stay. And yet by morning, she was gone without a sound, leaving only that feather and the numbers. The more I thought about it, the more I needed to know if she was okay. I told myself I'd just drive back far enough to check if her truck was still gone. Then I'd leave for good. It wasn't curiosity, it was responsibility. That's what I told myself. By the time I turned back onto the dirt road leading up to Winding Gap, the sky was already bruising over with clouds. Rain hung heavy in the air. The forest looked different in daylight, less haunted, more ordinary, but I could still feel that weight pressing down, that invisible pressure that made it hard to breathe. I slowed when I reached the old ranger cabin. Claire's truck was still gone, but the stone circle? Gone too. The feather, the numbers, everything had been washed clean, like the night had never happened. Except for one thing. Near the fire pit, on a patch of damp ground, someone had drawn something in the mud, lines crossing, spiraling inward. It looked almost like a maze, but incomplete, like whoever made it stopped halfway through. I crouched down to get a better look. That's when I noticed the footprints, bare, small, leading from the pattern toward the tree line, then disappearing into the undergrowth. I don't know why I followed them. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe I wanted proof that Claire had walked away, that she was real, that I hadn't dreamed it all. The prints wound through the ferns and roots until the forest began to thin. I came to a clearing where the ground dipped sharply down into a ravine, and there, scattered among the rocks, were feathers, hundreds of them, black, glinting faintly in the dim light, and bones, small ones, bird bones mostly, but not all. I felt my throat tighten. I turned to go, but something moved above me, a branch shifting, leaves rustling, and then I heard it again. 1 caw, 2 caws, 3. A pause. 1. My body went rigid. The sound came not from the trees this time, but from deeper in the ravine, echoing up through the stone like something underground. I stumbled backward, lost my footing, and slid down into the shallow dip. My palms scraped rock, and my flashlight, clipped to my belt, hit the ground and flickered. That's when I saw it. Half buried in the mud was a wooden signpost, rotted and broken. The paint had nearly peeled away, but I could still make out the words carved faintly across it. Ranger Station 2, personnel count, 3. I stood frozen, staring at that number, 3. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of decay. The counting started again, closer now, echoing between the stones like it was inside my head. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes as I clawed my way back up the slope. I didn't stop until I saw the van through the trees. I dove inside, slammed the door, started the engine with shaking hands, but before I could shift into gear, I saw something move in the rearview mirror. Claire. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, mud streaked up her legs, her braid half unraveled. She looked wrong somehow, like she'd been there a long time. I leaned out the window, yelling her name, but she didn't respond. She just raised one hand slowly and pointed at me. Then she spoke. I couldn't hear her at first, but I could read her lips. You shouldn't have interrupted. The next second, the windshield exploded into a storm of black wings. Crows slammed against the glass, beating it with their beaks and claws, screaming that awful rhythm, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. I floored the accelerator. The van lurched forward, fishtailing on the dirt. Feathers swept across the hood like smoke. I didn't look back. By the time I hit the highway, the sky had opened up with rain. I drove until I couldn't tell if the noise on the roof was rain or wings. That night, I checked into a cheap roadside motel in Cherokee. I didn't sleep much. Every time I started to drift, I'd hear it, the faint sound of tapping like beaks against glass. I turned the TV up to drown it out, but around 3 a.m., when I finally shut everything off, I realized the tapping wasn't from outside. It was coming from the bathroom mirror. I don't remember walking toward it, but suddenly I was staring at my own reflection. My face looked pale, drawn, but there was something behind me. Shadows moving, fluttering just beyond the light. I spun around. Nothing. But when I turned back, I noticed the glass was fogging at the corners, though the room was cold. Numbers began to form on the surface, slow and deliberate, written in the mist from nowhere. 3, 4, 1, 2. The last digit had changed. That was the moment I realized they weren't counting people. They were counting me. The next morning, I drove home, didn't even stop to check out. I took back roads, cut through towns I didn't know, just to keep moving. But everywhere I stopped, gas stations, rest areas, motels, there were crows, perched on signs, fences, power lines, watching, waiting. At first, I thought I was being paranoid until I started noticing the numbers again. Scribbled on receipts, spray painted on walls, carved into picnic tables, always 4 digits, always beginning with 3, 4, 1, and always one higher than before. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't slept more than an hour at a time since. The crows don't come inside, but they don't need to. They know where I am. I hear them in the distance now, even when I'm miles from the nearest forest. Sometimes I wake up to the sound of wings brushing the roof of the van. Other times it's the counting that wakes me. Soft, rhythmic, patient. Last night I went out to the garage where the Volkswagen is parked. I ran my hand over the hood, still flecked with bits of dirt from Winding Gap. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined everything. Maybe it was exhaustion, grief, hallucination. Then I saw them, tiny black feathers tucked into the cracks around the windshield, like they'd been left there deliberately, and on the glass, faint but visible under the dust, were new numbers. 3, 4, 1, 5. That's when I understood what Claire had meant. They only need to finish once. I didn't drive the van for days after that. Every time I looked at it, my chest tightened like something was reaching out from inside it, waiting for me to turn the key. The garage smelled faintly of oil and damp feathers. I'd sweep the floor every morning, but no matter how clean I got it, I'd always find one more feather there by nightfall. I tried to go back to normal life, work, grocery runs, the quiet suburban rhythms that used to ground me, but the world felt hollow now. Too bright, too smooth, like something was missing beneath the surface. People's voices sounded far away. I'd catch myself staring at the horizon, counting without meaning to. Steps on the sidewalk, crows on a wire, seconds between the flicker of a traffic light, always in sets of 3. I started keeping a notebook. Maybe if I wrote it all down, I could prove to myself that I was still tethered to reality. Page after page, I tracked every detail. The numbers, the feathers, the dreams, especially the dreams. They always start the same way. I'm driving up that same dirt road toward Winding Gap. The forest presses close on both sides, and the sky above is nothing but black feathers in motion. Claire is sitting in the passenger seat, but she doesn't speak. Her eyes are open wide, unblinking, staring straight ahead. I ask her where we're going, but she just turns her head slowly toward me, mouth half open, and whispers, "They only need to finish once." Then the cawing begins, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and I wake up gasping, always at 3:41 a.m. I tried sleeping with the lights on, didn't help. I tried recording the sounds, thinking maybe I could capture something real, but every playback was just static, and underneath it, a faint ticking sound like claws tapping against glass. I reached out to the local ranger station one morning, asked if there were any records of the landslide at Winding Gap. The woman on the phone paused for a long moment before saying, "You're not supposed to go up there." "I already did," I told her. "I think I saw something." She sighed. "You're not the first. People go up there thinking it's just an old ghost story, but the place keeps count." "What does that mean?" She didn't answer at first. Then she said quietly, "When the landslide happened, they lost track of how many were in the station that night. Official report said 2, locals said 3, but no one ever agreed on who the third was." The line went dead before I could ask more. That night, I went out to the garage again, lantern in hand. The van's metal skin reflected the light in dull ripples. My reflection looked distorted, as if the glass were warped. I slid the side door open and climbed inside. The air smelled like wet dirt and ash. I sat in the driver's seat and rested my hand on the wheel. The leather was cold, damp somehow. My breath fogged the window. I stared at the dashboard for a long time until I realized something had been scratched into the paint just above the glove compartment. 3 lines, then a space, then 1. 3416. I froze. I hadn't written it. I hadn't even been inside the van since that last night. The realization hit like a jolt of electricity. The numbers were increasing whether I was there or not, whether I did anything or not. Something was counting forward on its own. I slammed the door and stumbled back out into the night. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain, or maybe decay. I looked up and saw them. Dozens of crows perched along the power lines above the driveway, their shapes stark against the dull sky. They weren't calling this time. They were waiting. I don't remember running back inside, but when I did, I went straight for the kitchen drawer and pulled out the old topo map I'd picked up years ago. Winding Gap wasn't on it, but there was a faint contour of the ridgeline, a small bend in the river where the park boundaries ended. I traced the route with my finger, heart hammering. I didn't know what I was looking for. Proof, maybe. Or a way to make it stop. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The contour lines around the ravine where the ranger station had been collapsed into a spiral shape. Almost identical to the pattern I'd seen drawn in the mud near the fire pit. A maze. I thought about what Claire had said. They only need to finish once. Maybe the counting wasn't about death. Maybe it was about completion. Something unfinished, waiting to close the loop. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of the living room with the map spread out in front of me, listening to the faint ticking from the windows. Rain tapped the glass, but between the drops, I could swear I heard beaks, a soft, deliberate rhythm. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I had to go back. It wasn't bravery. It was exhaustion. I couldn't live with the waiting anymore. The sound of counting that followed me into every silence. If they were keeping track, if I was part of some unfinished pattern, I needed to know why. I packed the van with just the essentials: lantern, flashlight, camera, notebook, a half tank of gas. When I started the engine, it stuttered once, then caught, the familiar hum echoing through the garage. For the first time in weeks, it sounded almost alive. The drive back to Winding Gap felt longer than before. The road seemed narrower, the turns sharper. Clouds clung low to the ridge, and the wind carried the faint echo of caws long before I reached the dirt road. The sign was still there, half buried in vines, the letters barely visible. Winding Gap. The moment my tires touched the gravel, my chest tightened. The trees closed in again, branches whispering above. When I reached the clearing, it was exactly as I'd left it. Cabin leaning against the hill, fire pit dark, silence pressing in like a wall. But the ground was different. Someone or something had marked it. Circles carved into the soil, spiraling outward from the old ranger cabin like ripples frozen in time. Feathers were embedded in the dirt, hundreds of them, their black sheen dull in the gray light. And standing in the center of the spiral was Claire. She looked exactly as she had that first night. Same clothes, same braids, same stillness. But there was something hollow in her eyes now, like she was seeing through me. "You came back," she said softly. "I had to." She nodded once, almost sadly. "They've been waiting for you." I swallowed hard. "What are they?" "They're not crows," she said. "Not really. They're what's left when the count never ends." "What does that mean?" She stepped closer, the air around her colder than the wind. 3 bodies in the station. 2 were found. 1 wasn't. They've been counting ever since, waiting for someone to finish the number. "Finish it?" Her eyes flicked toward the van behind me. "Every time you drove away, they followed. Every number brought you closer." I looked past her to the cabin. The door hung slightly open. Inside, something glinted faintly in the dark. "Why me?" I asked. She smiled, small and tired. "Because you heard them." The wind shifted, and with it came the sound again, soft at first, then rising, echoing through the gap. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I turned toward the sound. The trees moved like a single living thing. The air filled with feathers, with motion. The sky darkened. Claire took my hand. Her skin was cold. "You can stop it," she whispered, "but only if you finish the count." "How?" "Stay until morning." The cawing grew louder. The spiral around us trembled, feathers lifting like ash. I looked at her, then at the van, the path back to safety just beyond the trees. I knew what she meant. If I left again, the numbers would keep climbing. If I stayed, maybe it would end. I took a step toward the cabin. The door creaked open wider. Inside, the darkness pulsed like breath. I could hear the faint tapping of claws, the whisper of wings. Behind me, Claire's voice was barely audible. "They only need to finish once." I stepped inside. The air was cold and still, heavy with the smell of old wood and ash. The floorboards creaked under my feet. My flashlight flickered, but I could see shapes moving along the walls, feathers, black and endless, folding and unfolding like a heartbeat. In the center of the room was a single wooden table. On it lay a notebook, yellowed and water-stained. I opened it. The first page was blank, except for a single line scrawled in shaky handwriting. Personnel count. 3, 4, 1, 7, and beneath it a space for one more digit. I stood there staring at that open page, my breath clouding the air in front of me, the ink on the paper still glistening faintly like it had been written only moments before. The whole room seemed to contract around me, the walls shifting with soft groans, the air thick enough to taste. Outside, the crows' voices merged into something deeper. No longer individual calls, but one unified pulse. A rhythm that filled my ears and my chest until I could feel it vibrating in my teeth. I looked down again at the numbers. 3, 4, 1, 7. The next line was blank, waiting. That space, that absence, felt alive. Behind me, something rustled in the darkness. The sound wasn't footsteps exactly, but the quiet scrape of feathers brushing across wood. I turned, raising my flashlight, and the beam caught the glint of a dozen eyes staring from the rafters. Crows perched shoulder to shoulder, their heads cocking in the same slow motion, all at once. They didn't move when I lifted the light. They just watched. Then one opened its beak and made a sound that wasn't quite a caw. It was lower, drawn out like the start of a word swallowed by the air. Another answered. Then another. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. The counting again. But now I realized something. It wasn't random. The rhythm matched my heartbeat. The pulse grew louder, faster. until I couldn't tell if the sound was coming from outside or inside me. I stumbled back toward the table, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned white. The notebook trembled beneath my hand, the numbers bleeding slightly into the paper, as though the ink were still moving. I whispered, "What do you want?" The air shifted, cold and sharp, and I heard her voice behind me. "Claire, you already know." I turned, and she was there in the doorway, half in shadow, her braid undone, eyes reflecting the dim light. She looked older now, not by years, but by something heavier, something worn. "You brought them back with you," she said. I shook my head. "I didn't mean to." "They don't care about meaning," she interrupted, stepping closer. "They care about the count. It's all they ever finish." "Then what happens when they finish?" Her gaze flicked toward the rafters. "The same thing that happened to me." The words hit me like a punch. "You?" She nodded slowly. "I was the third. I came here looking for answers too. I tried to stop it, tried to leave, but they keep track of the ones who break the pattern." I could barely breathe. "Then what am I?" She looked at the table, at the empty space waiting for one more number. The next. For a moment, all I could hear was my pulse roaring in my ears, the crows overhead shifting restlessly. Then, as if on cue, they went silent. The kind of silence that doesn't belong in the world. The kind that makes you feel like you're standing at the bottom of something vast and hollow. Claire stepped closer until she was only a few feet away. "They need you to finish it," she said softly. "They need you to write it down." I stared at her, shaking my head. "If I do that, it ends," she said. "For them, for you." I looked at the notebook. The pen was sitting beside it, rusted but still functional. My hand trembled as I reached out. The crows shifted again, hundreds of them above, the flutter of wings sounding like breath. I picked up the pen and hovered it above the page. The number wouldn't come. 3417, I whispered. "What's next?" Claire's voice came from behind me, barely audible. "Count your own." "My what?" She stepped closer. "Your nights." The realization came like ice water down my spine. Every night since Winding Gap, I'd heard the counting in my sleep, each one louder than the last. Each new number showing up the next morning somewhere I couldn't ignore. 3412, 3413, 3414, 3415, 3416, 3417. 7 nights. I dropped the pen, stumbling back. No, that's not." She reached out, grabbing my wrist. Her skin was cold, but her grip was iron. "You can't stop the count," she said, "but you can end it where it began." The wind outside rose suddenly, shrieking through the cracks in the cabin walls. Feathers filled the air, swirling around us like ash. The crows began again, 1, 2, 3, their rhythm aligning with the sound of my breath, my heartbeat, the tremble of the floor beneath my feet. Claire leaned close, her lips almost at my ear. "Finish it." Something in me broke. I grabbed the pen again and slammed it down onto the page. The ink burst, spreading like blood through paper fibers as I carved the final digit. 3418. The instant I wrote it, the air in the cabin seemed to collapse inward. Every sound was sucked out at once, the crows, the wind, my heartbeat, until all that was left was a single sharp tone ringing in my ears. Claire stepped back, her expression unreadable. Then for the first time she smiled. "Now it's done," she whispered. The floor gave way beneath me. I fell through darkness, feathers brushing against my skin, air thick with the smell of earth and rot. I hit something solid and opened my eyes to see dim gray light filtering through twisted branches. The forest was silent again. The cabin above me was gone. The van was gone. Everything was gone. I was standing in the ravine. The same ravine I'd seen before, the one filled with bones and feathers. Only now, the bones were gone. The dirt was smooth, freshly turned. A single crow stood perched on a nearby rock, watching me. Its head tilted, and it let out a slow, deliberate call. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Then silence. I turned toward the slope, trying to climb, but my limbs felt heavy, slow. The air seemed to pull at me. I made it a few feet before I stopped. There was something glinting in the mud at my feet. I brushed it aside with my hand and froze. A keychain, a small metal VW emblem, rusted and worn. Mine. The realization came slow, like ice spreading through my chest. The van wasn't gone. I was. I looked up toward the ridge where the light bled through the trees. The crow flapped its wings once, then again, and flew upward, disappearing into the light. I heard the faint echo of Claire's voice as it faded into the wind. They only need to finish once. I don't remember falling again. Just the sound of cause folding into silence, the world shrinking to a single point of breath before everything went dark. When I woke, I was in the driver's seat of my van. The morning sun poured through the windshield. The road ahead was clear. My hands were steady on the wheel. For a moment, I thought maybe it had been a dream. I looked out the window, no crows, no feathers, just the hum of morning. Then I glanced at the odometer. It wasn't reading mileage anymore. It read 3,418, the same number I'd written in the cabin. A chill ran through me. I reached for the ignition, but before I turned the key, I heard something above me. A faint flutter, like wings brushing metal. I stepped out and looked up. A single crow sat on the roof, its eyes fixed on me. It didn't move, didn't call, just watched. Then from somewhere far off in the trees, I heard another sound, soft, rhythmic, unmistakable. Counting, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It grew fainter with each repetition, fading into the distance until it became nothing more than the echo of memory. I stood there a long time, the wind moving gently through the trees, the world ordinary again. Eventually, I got back into the van and started driving. The engine hummed steady beneath my hands, the road unwinding like a ribbon of silver through the hills. But even now, I don't look in the mirrors, because sometimes when the sky darkens and the air turns still, I see shadows flicker across the glass, and for a heartbeat, I hear it again. 1, 2, 3, then a pause, then one more. They're not counting me anymore. They're counting the next one. I still remember the first time I realized the wilderness doesn't owe us safety. It was in the Great Smoky Mountains, humid air so thick you could almost chew it, fog curling through the trees like something alive. My name's Carter. I'm 35 now, but back then I was 26, fresh off a long haul of work burnout, convinced a few solo nights in nature would clear my head. I didn't want comfort. I wanted quiet. The kind of quiet you only get when the last cell bar disappears, when it's just you and whatever's been living out there long before people started pitching tents. I had an old Volkswagen camper van, pale blue, rust around the edges, curtains that smelled like old pine. I parked it off a service road near one of the lesser-used trails. Rangers told me it wasn't closed, just not maintained. I remember that word stuck with me, not maintained. That's bureaucratic language for you're on your own out there. The first night felt like a reward, the kind of solitude that hums in your bones. I made camp beside a stream, cooked ramen on a tiny stove, and listened to the sound of water rolling over stones. Everything felt right, normal, safe. But the human brain has this way of picking up things before you consciously do. My first clue was the stillness. The second night, the woods went silent around 10 p.m. Not the natural hush that comes with dusk. I mean, everything stopped. No crickets, no frogs, just absence. The kind that presses on your chest and makes you aware of how small you really are. I told myself I was being paranoid. But there was a smell, faint at first, like wet metal. Iron, maybe? Blood. Then it faded, replaced by the smell of campfire smoke, even though I hadn't lit one. I stepped out of the van, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through mist that clung low to the ground. The stream should have been to my left, but the sound of running water came from behind me now. My sense of direction felt scrambled. I turned slowly, trying to anchor myself to the van's shape. That's when I saw it, or thought I did. A figure across the stream, standing still, a faint glint of something metallic near its shoulder. My first thought was another camper, maybe a ranger, but no light reflected from the eyes. The face, if there was one, seemed blurred by the fog, like water shifting over glass. Then a voice, distant, soft, almost rehearsed, "You shouldn't be here alone." The words didn't echo. They didn't even sound directional. They came from everywhere and nowhere at once. I bolted back into the van, slammed the door, and sat there, holding my breath, waiting for footsteps, movement, anything. But there was nothing. Just the sound of my own heartbeat, too loud in my ears. When morning came, the world felt like it had reset. Birds again, light streaming through the windshield, the smell of damp earth instead of iron. For a few minutes, I convinced myself it was all a dream. But then I saw them. Boot prints in the mud, right where the stream bent. Not mine. The prints led up to the van, circled it once, and stopped by the back door. That was the first time I considered leaving. But curiosity, that's the sickness of people like me. We always think we're the exception, the one who will find the rational explanation. Later that afternoon, I hiked to the ranger outpost 10 miles away. The ranger there, a woman in her 50s named Josie, listened quietly while I told her what happened. She didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss me. She just looked tired, like she'd heard it all before. Then she said, "You camped near Slate Creek, didn't you?" I nodded. She pulled out a binder, flipped through pages of missing person reports, yellowed paper, handwritten notes in the margins. She stopped on a photo. This is where he was last seen. It was a man, mid-30s, hiking gear, smiling in that way people do before they realize the woods have rules of their own. He'd gone missing in the same spot 2 years earlier. The photo was taken by his brother, a final image uploaded before he vanished. The report said he was camping alone, same area, same month. Sometimes, Josie said, the park doesn't like being alone either. That line stuck with me all the way back to camp. The air grew heavier the closer I got, like the forest had shifted in my absence. I found the van right where I left it, but the doors were wet, not from rain. The condensation formed streaks down the sides like something had pressed its face against the metal overnight. That night, I couldn't bring myself to cook. I sat inside, lights off, windows cracked, just listening. Around midnight, I heard voices again. Not one this time, several, faint, overlapping, like a recording looped backward. I pressed my ear to the window. The words were unintelligible, but the rhythm was human. Laughter, then silence, then a scream that cut short. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed to get behind the wheel and drive. But my headlights had begun to flicker on their own, dimming and brightening like something was pacing in front of them. I grabbed my camera, an old Nikon, and snapped a few shots through the windshield. I didn't see anything then, but when I checked the photos later, every single one was the same. Fog, tree silhouettes, and in the center, a shape, human-sized, leaning forward like it was listening through the glass. When the sun rose, I left. I didn't pack properly. I just drove until I hit pavement again. The relief I felt seeing other cars was almost religious, but leaving didn't make it stop. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fog. I heard that voice again, "You shouldn't be here alone." I'd wake up drenched in sweat, sometimes with the faint smell of iron still in my nose. That's when I started digging. News archives, missing persons databases, forums. I found patterns. Reports of backpackers vanishing from that same section of the Smokies going back decades. The descriptions were eerily consistent. Eerie stillness, disoriented senses, the smell of metal, voices in fog. Locals had a name for it, the Hollow Walkers. They said they weren't ghosts, not exactly. They were the echoes of those who never made it out, drawn to others who dared to be alone. A whispering chain, always growing. I didn't believe in any of that, not until the photos from my trip began to change. The ones I'd uploaded to my laptop showed something new every week. An extra shadow, a blur where there hadn't been one before. In one, I could see the van reflected in the stream, and beside it a figure standing just behind me. I haven't camped alone since, but every time I drive past a trailhead, that same chill hits me. The feeling that the forest remembers, that something somewhere still wants me back. That's the thing about national parks. They show you beauty so deep it almost feels spiritual, but beauty is just a mask. And if you listen closely enough, beneath the waterfalls, beneath the wind, you'll hear the names of the ones who never came home. They're still out there, walking the hollow trails. After that trip, I told myself I was done with solo camping. But the mind has a strange way of dragging you back toward what nearly broke you. The human instinct to understand, sometimes it's stronger than fear. 2 years later, I found myself back on the road, the same Volkswagen groaning beneath the weight of too many miles and bad memories. This time, I wasn't heading to the Smokies. I was driving west into the Rockies. I told everyone it was for a photography project, documenting the forgotten trails of America. But deep down, I knew what I was really chasing. I wanted to prove that what happened back there was explainable, that fear was just a chemical reaction, not a warning. The first few nights in Colorado went smooth. The mountains had that clean, impossible air that feels like truth itself. I parked in a valley outside of Gunnison, isolated, no other campers in sight. At night, the stars were so thick they made the sky look bruised. But the thing about fear is, it doesn't just vanish, it waits. It hides in the body, in muscle memory, in scent. And when the world gets quiet enough, it returns. The first sign came from the radio. My van's AM channel started catching static every night around 10:30. The static wasn't random. It pulsed, almost rhythmic, like breathing. One night, beneath the hiss, I heard it. A voice. Not a word, just a sound, like someone whispering my name through glass. I turned the knob off and sat there in the dark, my pulse sinking with that absent sound. The next morning, I hiked up toward an abandoned fire lookout I'd seen marked faintly on an old map. The trail wasn't maintained anymore, overgrown and half-eaten by moss. About 3 miles in, I found something that shouldn't have been there. A backpack. Faded red, straps torn, zipper rusted shut. When I brushed off the dirt, I found initials burned faintly into the fabric. JR. At first, I didn't think much of it. Lost gear isn't uncommon out here. But when I brought it back to camp and opened it, my breath caught. Inside were Polaroids, dozens of them, of forests, campsites, and one I recognized immediately, the creek from the Smokies. That impossible curve in the stream, that same twisted birch tree, the initials, the missing man from Josie's binder, Jason Reardon. I dropped the photo. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to flip through the rest. The later pictures were darker, less composed. Some were taken in total blackness. Others showed blurry shapes between trees. In the last photo, the camera had caught something mid-motion, a face, pale, eyes too close together, lips parted like it was breathing in the light itself. The timestamp said July 14, 2016. The day after Jason was reported missing. I wanted to believe someone faked it. Maybe a cruel joke. But then I noticed something in the bottom corner of that last shot, half visible, reflected in the lens. A blue van. Mine. I hadn't even been there back then. I burned the backpack that night, every single photo. But when the plastic melted and the smoke curled upward, it didn't smell like burning film. It smelled like the same iron tang from the Smokies. And beneath that smell, I swear I heard laughter. Sleep came in flashes that night, heavy and uneven. I dreamed I was back by the stream, except this time I wasn't alone. The fog shaped itself into bodies, dozens of them. Some with backpacks, some without. They weren't attacking, they were waiting, and every one of them had the same eyes, reflective, curious, empty. When I woke, it was still dark. My windshield was fogged over, and on the inside, someone had traced a single word with their finger. Stay. I drove until dawn. The van rattled over gravel, tires spitting dust, headlights cutting tunnels through the dark. I didn't look back until I hit the highway. But I made a mistake. I looked in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I saw someone sitting in the back seat. Just a shape. No face. Then gone. For weeks afterward, I felt watched. Even in towns, even in daylight. Reflections in shop windows seemed to move a split second slower than I did. I went to the authorities again, this time in Colorado. They logged the report, took my statement, even sent a ranger up to the site. They said they found nothing of concern. But that night, a ranger named Daniel called me privately. His voice was low, careful. He said, "You weren't the first to report that area. We've had at least 4 disappearances in that same canyon. Each one solo, each one leaving something behind, shoes, cameras, packs, never bodies." He paused, then added quietly, "There's a pattern we're not supposed to talk about. People think it draws them, like it waits for those who come looking for quiet." His voice cracked slightly, as if he'd said too much. "Whatever you do," he said, "don't go back." But obsession is a kind of gravity. Once you've seen the edge of something real, you can't stop yourself from leaning closer. So I started documenting, collecting stories. I reached out to families of missing backpackers, people who'd vanished from Zion, Yosemite, Glacier, the Tetons. Every story sounded different, yet underneath the same bones showed through. Silence before disappearance, disorientation, fog, sometimes a smell like rust. One father showed me a final voicemail from his son. The message was garbled, almost swallowed by static. But just before it cut off, there was a voice in the background. Not the son's, something older, rougher. "You shouldn't be here alone." That phrase. Again, like it was following me through different mouths. I started to think maybe these weren't places where people disappeared by accident. Maybe they were taken in, absorbed. The land, the silence, the mist. Maybe they weren't backgrounds at all. Maybe they were alive. When I told a researcher friend at the University of Montana about all this, she didn't laugh. She said, "Have you ever read about infrasound? It's sound below human hearing, low frequencies that can cause nausea, panic, hallucinations. Some national parks have natural geological formations that emit them during weather shifts." She said it could explain everything. The fear, the confusion, the voices. But that didn't explain the photos changing. It didn't explain the van condensation from the inside. It didn't explain why people kept disappearing without leaving trails. I wanted answers, so I did something reckless. I decided to go back, this time not to the Smokies, but to Slate Creek itself. I waited until early autumn when the park was quieter. I drove through Tennessee until the pines grew taller and the air turned electric with moisture. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, but my chest buzzed with purpose. When I reached the old service road, I saw something that nearly made me turn back. A sign, freshly bolted into the post, read, "Area closed, ongoing investigation." I should have turned around, but I didn't. I parked the van where I had before, stepped out, and immediately noticed the quiet, the same unnatural stillness, and underneath it, a low hum. It wasn't mechanical. It felt deep, like the earth itself was breathing. I followed it into the trees, camera rolling, every instinct screaming that I was repeating someone else's last mistake. About half a mile in, I saw it, the same stream, same twisted birch. The air smelled metallic, the fog thick and wet like breath. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me, slow, careful. I turned, but the mist was too dense. Then, just above the waterline, a reflection moved. Not mine. It stepped forward, human shape, head tilted, eyes black and hollow. When it spoke, the voice wasn't outside me. It was in my head. "Welcome back." My knees nearly gave out. The camera slipped from my hands and hit the rocks. The lens cracked, but the red light stayed on. That's when the fog began to ripple, like something massive was moving beneath it. And then everything went dark. When I woke up, the world was gray. Not night, not day, just a dim twilight that made everything look flat, like I was standing inside a photograph that hadn't finished developing. My throat burned, my ears rang, and the air, God, the air, had weight to it, like I was breathing through wet cloth. I was still by the stream, but the sound of water was gone. The current had stopped, frozen mid-motion, like the flow itself had forgotten what to do. My camera lay nearby, half buried in silt, the red record light still blinking. I didn't remember passing out. My last memory was that voice, "Welcome back." It wasn't just a greeting. It sounded familiar, like it knew me before I'd ever come here. I grabbed the camera, hoping it had captured something, anything. The screen flickered to life, but the playback was glitching. Static, distortion, white noise. The only clear image was the last frame before I blacked out. A blur of fog, and behind it, dozens of figures emerging from the trees, their shapes just beyond focus. And then I saw something that made my stomach drop. In the bottom right corner, reflected faintly in the stream, was a face. Mine. Eyes open. Mouth moving. But I wasn't saying anything. I stumbled back, slipping on the slick ground. Panic took over. Every rational thought shut down. I needed to get to the van. I needed out. The forest didn't feel like forest anymore. It felt like a tunnel, and I was running through a throat. Branches brushed my shoulders, wet with dew that felt too warm, too human. The fog clung to my skin like fingers. I reached the clearing and stopped dead. The van was there, but it wasn't mine. Same model, same color, but cleaner. Too clean. Like it had just rolled off the lot decades ago. The curtains inside weren't the ones I'd hung. The plates stacked on the counter weren't mine, and through the window I saw movement. A man sitting in the driver's seat. He looked like me. Not a perfect reflection, but close enough that my brain took a few seconds to reject it. His hair shorter, his eyes sunken, expression blank. He turned slowly toward me. I froze. He raised one hand, palm against the glass, and something I couldn't hear. His lips formed a single word, run. That broke me. I bolted past the van and down the service road. My lungs were fire, my legs screaming. Every direction looked wrong. The trail markers faded, trees rearranged like they'd been shuffled while I wasn't looking. Then, out of nowhere, I hit a clearing I didn't remember. In the center stood a ranger tower, old, decaying, wood half collapsed. It leaned slightly, like something massive had brushed against it years ago. I climbed anyway, because high ground meant visibility, and visibility meant control. Halfway up, I smelled it again. Iron, sweat, rot. The air thickened with the same stench that haunted me since the first trip. My flashlight beam caught something on the wall. Carvings. Dozens of names etched into the wood, overlapping like desperate signatures. Some were fresh, and one of them was mine. Carver. That was my last name. I don't remember carving it. I'd never been here before. When I reached the top, the fog below swirled like a living thing. And through it, I saw movement. Human shapes weaving in and out of the mist. Hundreds of them walking the same circular pattern over and over, following the stream that no longer moved. Their heads were tilted downward, their steps synchronized like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. And then they stopped. Every single one of them turned toward me at once. I backed up so fast I nearly fell. My flashlight slipped and hit the railing, spinning light across the horizon. And that's when I saw it. Far off, across the fog, lights. Flickering yellow dots spaced evenly in a long, crooked line. Campfires, dozens of them, but no heat, no smoke, just light. And around each one stood a figure, motionless, waiting. I started shouting, for help, for anything. My voice sounded small, eaten by the air. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs behind me. Slow, wood creaking under careful weight. I turned, shaking, holding the flashlight like a weapon. And there she was, Ranger Josie. Except not quite. Her uniform was soaked through, her eyes milky, skin gray with the pallor of old paper. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Carter," she said softly. "You came back." I couldn't move. "How do you know my name?" Her head tilted. "You told me." No, I met you years ago. And then you came back." She stepped closer. "They all do." Her voice echoed strangely, like there were two of her speaking slightly out of sync. I stumbled backward, hitting the railing. The tower groaned. She stopped just a few feet away, her breath fogging the air in front of her face. "They remember you now. You saw them once. That's enough." "Who?" I demanded. "What are they?" "The ones the park keeps," she whispered. "The ones who thought they could leave." And then she smiled again, wider this time. "You can't leave what remembers you." The floor cracked beneath my boots. I lunged for the ladder, sliding down the rungs 2 at a time. Her voice followed me, growing distorted, layered with something deeper, like wind dragging over stone. By the time my feet hit the ground, the fog had thickened to white walls. I ran blind, hands out, tripping over roots, catching my breath in gasps that tasted like blood. And then, headlights. Headlights. Faint at first, then growing brighter. My van. The real one. Engine running. Door open. I didn't question it. I just dove in, slammed the door, floored the pedal. The road twisted under the wheels. I didn't look back until I hit asphalt again. When I did, the fog was gone. The sky was blue, birds were chirping. The forest behind me looked normal. Ordinary. but my dash cam was still recording. I pulled over and played it back, desperate to make sense of what had just happened. The footage showed everything. The fog, the van that wasn't mine, the climb up the tower. But when Josie appeared, her face was distorted beyond recognition, like the camera couldn't focus on her. And at the end, as I was running, the frame froze for half a second on something I hadn't seen in person. Dozens of figures standing at the tree line, watching, each of them wearing my face. The video cut to black. I sat there, hands shaking on the steering wheel, breathing in the smell of gasoline and sweat. Then the radio clicked on by itself, static first, then a familiar voice whispering through the noise. "You shouldn't be here alone." My own voice. The words came out of the speakers, distorted but unmistakable, and then silence. I don't remember driving home. I just remember pulling into my driveway hours later, stepping out and realizing the van's undercarriage was dripping water. Not oil, not fuel, water. When I crouched to look closer, I saw mud, river mud, the same kind that collects on Slate Creek's banks. I hadn't driven through any streams. That night, I burned the van, watched it go up in smoke in an empty field behind my house. The flames turned the paint black, curling metal into shapes that looked almost human. But when it was over, I could still smell the iron. And in the distance, faint, too far to be real, the sound of laughter carried through the wind. I thought I'd escaped. I thought I'd left that part of myself behind. But the next morning, there was a message on my porch, a single Polaroid, edges damp, photo still developing. The image, a forest, fog, a stream, and in the foreground, me, holding the camera. I stood there on my porch in the thin morning light, holding that Polaroid like it was a living thing. The image hadn't fully set yet. The colors were still bleeding into shape, but the outline of my face was clear enough. And what chilled me most wasn't that it showed me in that same forest again. It was that my expression wasn't one of fear. It was calm, peaceful, like I belonged there. I flipped it over. There was handwriting on the back, wet, smudged, almost finger-traced. "You never left." I dropped it instantly. My hand was shaking, every nerve in my body screaming that this was something I shouldn't even be touching. I went inside, locked the door, and sat by the window with the curtains drawn tight. For the first time in years, I wished I wasn't alone. But that's the curse of all this, isn't it? People disappear because they go alone. And yet the ones who come back, we can't stand to be around anyone for long. Something follows us back, and it doesn't like company. I tried to reason it out. Maybe someone had found my photos online. Maybe it was a prank, someone playing off the missing person lore around Slate Creek. But the timing, the smell that lingered on that photo, that metallic wet scent, was too perfect, too targeted. By nightfall, my rationalizations had all collapsed under their own weight. I packed a bag, grabbed my camera again, and drove. No destination, just motion. I thought distance might dilute whatever this was, but the thing about running from what's inside you, it doesn't work when what's inside you isn't entirely yours anymore. Somewhere in Utah, on a stretch of road that barely qualified as one, I stopped for the night. The desert air was dry, almost comforting after months of damp forest memories. I parked off an old service trail, miles from anything, and sat under the stars until my mind softened a little. That's when I noticed the tracks. Not tire marks, not animal prints, bare feet, human, small, child-sized, leading in a perfect line from behind the van into the open desert. I followed them for maybe 100 feet before I stopped myself. My flashlight beam caught something glinting half buried in the sand. I dug it out, a compass, brass, old. The glass cracked, the needle twitching even though there was no wind. When I turned it over, 3 letters were etched on the back, J.R. Jason Reardon. Again, that impossible name finding me hundreds of miles from where he'd vanished. And then I realized the needle wasn't pointing north. It was pointing back toward the van. I wanted to throw it, bury it, anything, but I froze when I heard the whisper. Right behind me, a child's voice, soft and low. "Follow." I spun around. No one, just open desert. My light cut through a haze of dust, the horizon empty. But when I turned back, there were footprints beside mine. Fresh, deeper, leading the opposite direction back toward the van. I ran. I didn't care anymore about footage or proof. I just needed to be away from that sound, that smell, that feeling. When I got back inside, I locked every door and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel until sunrise. That was the first time I saw them clearly. Not ghosts, not illusions. Something else. As dawn broke, I caught movement through the windshield. Figures standing just beyond the ridge, 10, maybe 15, each wearing old hiking gear, each staring in absolute stillness toward the van. Their faces were wrong, like copies made from memory, close, but off in the small ways that make your gut twist. They didn't move as the sun rose. They didn't blink. And when I finally started the engine, their heads tilted all at once, tracking the motion like predators. I drove fast enough to make the tires whine. The rearview mirror caught them growing smaller, but they didn't fade. They stayed visible far longer than they should have, until the horizon swallowed them. By the time I reached a town, some signless speck near Moab, I felt hollowed out. I parked by a diner, stumbled inside, and ordered coffee just to feel normal again. The waitress was friendly, asked where I'd come from. I lied. Said I was touring the parks for photography. She smiled, poured my cup, and said, "You folks always come back different." I froze mid-sip. "What do you mean, you folks?" I asked. She nodded toward a bulletin board near the door. Pinned there were missing person flyers. Dozens. All backpackers, hikers, campers. Her tone softened. People like you, the ones that go looking for something out there and come back seeing things they can't explain. I followed her gaze to one of the flyers. My throat went dry. Jason Reardon, same photo Josie had shown me years before, but the date listed wasn't 2016 anymore. It was 2023. Updated. I asked her when the board was last changed. She said, "Oh, that one? Ranger came through a couple weeks ago with new copies, said the families requested reissues." "Which Ranger?" I asked. "Older woman," she said. "Name tag," said Josie. I couldn't breathe. I left the coffee untouched and stumbled out into the morning glare. My head was spinning, the desert light too sharp, my thoughts unraveling. That night, I checked into a cheap motel, sat on the bed, and stared at the Polaroid again. The image had finally finished developing. Only it wasn't just me in the picture anymore. Behind me, half visible in the fog, was a second shape. Tall, pale, smiling. I flipped the photo over. New writing, fainter than before, but legible under the light. "Follow the water, you'll understand. I don't know why I listened. Curiosity? Guilt? Maybe both." The next morning, I drove north toward the Colorado River. The landscape stretched into Red Canyon country, the kind that feels prehistoric untouched. Every curve of the earth felt like it was watching me. When I reached the riverbank, I parked and stepped out. The water shimmered gold under the sun, gentle, harmless. But when I crouched to touch it, the reflection staring back wasn't mine. It was the other me, the calm one, the one from the photo. He smiled. And the sound that came next wasn't water. It was breathing. I stumbled back, heart hammering, but my boots slid on the mud. The smell returned. Iron, old earth, rot. My reflection moved closer, even as I stayed still. And then the surface rippled. Not from my touch, but from beneath. A hand broke through, pale, human, fingers reaching toward the air. Before I could move, it gripped my wrist. The temperature dropped instantly. My veins felt like ice. I screamed, trying to pull free, but the grip tightened. Something beneath the water was pulling. Not hard, not violent, but steady. Patient. And then I heard the whisper again, right at my ear, though no one stood behind me. "You've been walking their path too long." I yanked back with everything I had. The hand slipped away, leaving streaks of black water across my skin that burned like frost. I stumbled backward into the dirt, gasping, staring at the river as the ripples smoothed out again. For a moment, there was peace. Just wind and sunlight. Then a sound rose from the canyon, distant, mournful, like voices carried through stone, and I knew. The disappearances, they weren't random. They weren't accidents. The parks take people because people leave pieces of themselves behind. A photograph, a voice, a footprint. Enough for the land to remember. Enough for the silence to fill in what's missing. and once the earth remembers your shape, it doesn't let go. I sat there for hours, watching the river until dusk. Every time the water shifted, I thought I saw faces beneath the surface, faint outlines, watching, waiting. One of them smiled and whispered, "See you soon." I didn't drive that night. I couldn't. My hands wouldn't stop trembling long enough to grip the wheel. I just sat by the riverbank, headlights dim, engine off, listening to the hum of crickets and the whisper of the current, if it was a current. The sound wasn't quite right. Too measured, too rhythmic. It reminded me of breathing. The moon came up heavy and orange over the canyon rim, and I remember thinking it looked too close. The reflection in the river stretched long and distorted, like a mouth opening. I told myself I'd leave when the sun rose, that I just needed one night of rest before getting far, far away from this place. But deep down, I knew I wasn't going anywhere. Something had anchored me here. Sleep came in pieces. I don't know when the dream started or when it stopped being a dream. I was standing in the woods again, the Smokies. The fog was thicker than ever, glowing with some faint internal light. The trees around me leaned in like listeners. I could hear laughter echoing faintly through the mist, human laughter, distant and layered, like a recording played too many times. Then I saw them again, the hollow walkers. Dozens of them, moving between the trees. Some wore hiking gear, some were barefoot, and all of them walked with the same slow, deliberate pace. None of them had faces anymore, just smooth, pale skin where features should have been. And in front of them, leading the group, was me. Not quite me, but close enough that my chest went cold. That version of me turned, smiled, and gestured for me to follow. I woke up gasping, sweat running down my neck. The windows of the van were fogged from the inside again. I could smell it. The iron, faint but there. And on the windshield, drawn in the condensation, were 5 words, "You know where to go." I didn't even hesitate. Some part of me already knew what it meant. The compass, the river, the water that never stopped whispering. I turned the key. The engine sputtered to life, coughing like an old man waking from a nightmare. The headlights flickered across the canyon walls, illuminating brief flashes of movement, shadows that didn't belong to trees. I followed the dirt road east, the compass sitting on the dash, the needle trembling wildly until it finally steadied on a direction. I drove until the trail ended at a rock wall carved with an old park marker. The lettering was half worn, but I could still read the name, Slate Creek Trailhead. My stomach dropped. I wasn't anywhere near Tennessee, and yet the land remembered. The fog came back fast, rolling in like smoke through the canyons. I stepped out, flashlight cutting a thin beam into the haze. The air was humid now, wrong for the desert. My boots sank slightly into the earth, as if the ground were softening underfoot. And then, faintly, I heard music. Not a melody, but something like humming, low, droning, circular. It seemed to come from below me. I followed it, pushing through thick vines that hadn't been there moments earlier until I reached a narrow crevice in the canyon floor. The sound was louder there, pulsing like a heartbeat. Against every shred of sense I had left, I crouched and looked down. And looked down. The beam of my flashlight hit water maybe 20 feet below, moving in slow, deliberate waves. Something shimmered under the surface. And then I heard her voice again. "Carter." It wasn't distant this time. It came from directly below me. Josie, the ranger. "Carter, help us." I leaned closer, trying to see through the shifting water. Faces moved beneath it, blurred but human. Dozens, maybe hundreds. And then a hand reached up again, the same pale fingers as before, grasping at the rock ledge. But this time, another followed, then another, until a dozen arms were reaching, clawing for the surface. I staggered back, but one hand caught my ankle. The skin was slick and cold as marble. I kicked free and scrambled for the van, heart hammering, breath ragged. The humming grew louder, warping into something that wasn't quite sound anymore. More like pressure in my skull, as if the land itself were speaking without words. By the time I slammed the door shut, the fog was swallowing everything outside the windshield. I floored it, the tires spinning mud before catching grip. But the road was gone. The headlights illuminated nothing but white. I drove blind, praying the terrain didn't drop off beneath me. My pulse was so loud I could barely hear the engine. And then the van hit something, hard. Metal shrieked, glass cracked, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting behind the wheel, the engine silent, the air filled with that wet metallic scent again. The headlights were still on, casting light onto a tree line ahead. Except the trees weren't trees. They were people. Dozens of them, standing upright, skin bark-colored, faces blank, hands at their sides. Their torsos were wrapped in thin vines that pulsed faintly like veins. I couldn't breathe. They began to move, slowly, mechanically stepping toward the van in unison. Their eyes, if you could call them eyes, reflected the light like glass marbles. I jammed the keys into the ignition, turned, prayed. The engine roared, coughed, died. The shapes reached the hood, their hands pressed against the metal, leaving wet imprints that steamed in the light. The van began to rock, just slightly, like something massive was breathing beneath it. And then, silence. They stopped. For a long moment, no one moved. Then one of them leaned down, face to the glass. The reflection showed what my eyes couldn't see. My own face staring back, lips moving in sync with theirs. I heard my own voice whisper, from outside the van, "You found it." The door handle clicked. And I don't remember anything after that. When I came to, it was daylight again. My van was parked at a ranger station I didn't recognize. The air was dry, normal. My clothes were still wet with mud. A ranger, someone new, young, clean-shaven, was standing outside, clipboard in hand. He looked startled when he saw me wake. "Sir," he said carefully, "you've been missing for 3 days." I didn't respond. My voice wouldn't work. He said they found me on a closed-access road 50 miles from the nearest trail. Van engine off, camera still recording. When I checked the footage later, it was 30 hours of nothing but fog. Then, right near the end, the lens caught something for a few seconds. A clearing filled with motionless figures, their faces turning toward the camera. Each one was whispering the same word, over and over: "Stay." The tape cut there. They kept me for observation for 2 days, said I was dehydrated, probably disoriented. The doctors tried to explain it away: delirium, exhaustion, isolation-induced psychosis. I let them, but when they returned my belongings, I noticed something missing. The compass. I asked the ranger about it. He frowned and said, "What compass? I never mentioned one." I hadn't written it in any report. Still, he smiled in that way people do when they're trying to end a conversation. "If we find anything else," he said, "we'll let you know." That night, back home, I found it waiting on my doorstep. The brass had darkened to near black. The glass cracked deeper than before. The needle spun slowly on its own, and carved faintly beneath the original initials, there was a new set. CR my own. I don't sleep much anymore. When I do, I dream of fog and water and faces that look like mine but move slightly out of sync. Sometimes I wake to find mud on my floor, wet footprints near the door, and once, just before dawn, I swear I heard the river outside my window. The whisper carried on the wind, soft, patient, inevitable. "You never left." It's been 6 months since that last trip, and I still can't tell where the dream ends and the waking begins. My neighbors think I've gone quiet because I'm writing again, editing all that old travel footage. They don't know the truth, that I unplug every device after midnight, that I cover every mirror, that I can't stand the sound of running water anymore. It's strange how the things you once loved can turn on you. I used to find peace in the sound of streams, the rustle of trees, the slow rhythm of rain against the roof of my van. Now every drop sounds like someone breathing against glass. But the real reason I'm speaking now, the reason I've decided to record this, is because it's starting again. 3 nights ago, I woke to the sound of static. It was faint at first, coming from somewhere deep in the house, like a radio left on in another room. I followed it to my living room, heart thudding, pulse in my ears. The TV was on, snowy screen, flickering gray. I don't even have cable. Then, through the static, the image sharpened just enough to show a landscape, mist, trees, and the faint shimmer of a river. The camera angle was wrong, low, almost ground level, and right in the center of the frame stood a figure. Me. I was wearing the same clothes I'd worn the night I burned the van. The screen crackled, distorted, and then my own voice came through the speaker, hollow and calm. "You came back." I pulled the plug from the wall, but the image stayed for 3 full seconds after the power died. I didn't sleep that night. The smell of iron came back before dawn, and when I stepped outside for air, I found a new Polaroid pinned under the windshield wiper of my car. This one wasn't of the forest. It was of my house, taken from across the street. There were footprints on the driveway, bare, wet, faintly muddy. That's when I realized whatever this thing is, it doesn't care about distance. The parks were never the origin. They're the gateway. I spent the next 2 days trying to rationalize again. Maybe I'd brought spores, bacteria, something hallucinogenic back from the wetlands. Maybe mold was growing somewhere in the vents. But when I called an inspector, he refused to enter after taking one step inside. He said it felt wrong. He didn't charge me, didn't even look me in the eye when he left. On the 3rd day, I decided I couldn't stay here anymore. I packed what I could, filled the tank of an old borrowed pickup, and started driving west again. I didn't care where. I just wanted to move. By the 2nd night I was crossing through Nevada, the horizon endless and flat. The moon hung too low again, orange and heavy like it was watching. I stopped at a rest area just before dawn. Empty lot, a single vending machine flickering by the bathrooms. I sat on the hood trying to breathe through the exhaustion. That's when I saw it, the compass. It was sitting on the passenger seat inside the truck, even though I'd left it wrapped in duct tape and locked in a drawer back home. The needle wasn't spinning anymore. It was still, pointing directly ahead toward the horizon where the mountains rose like black teeth. I don't remember making the decision. I just drove. Hours passed. The road narrowed, cracked, eventually turned to dirt. The truck's suspension creaked as I followed what must have been an old mining route. The landscape grew stranger, barren but alive, shapes in the rock that almost looked like figures frozen mid-motion. And then, at the end of the road, I saw it. An old campground. Deserted. The sign read, "Eagle Wash Recreation Area." The name meant nothing to me, but the air hit the back of my throat with that same metallic sting. The wind carried the faint smell of damp pine, impossible this deep into the desert. The campground was arranged in a loop of 10 pads, all overgrown with weeds. The fire rings were filled with sand, but at the center of the loop was a pond, perfectly round, perfectly still, and floating in the middle, barely visible under the surface, was something pale. I walked closer, drawn despite everything screaming inside me to stop. The reflection on the water was my face. Yes, but it wasn't reacting right. When I tilted my head, it didn't move. When I stepped back, it leaned closer. My breath fogged the air, even though it wasn't cold. And then I heard them again. The voices, layered and quiet, like 100 people murmuring prayers underwater. "You shouldn't be here alone." I fell to my knees at the water's edge, heart hammering, hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the flashlight. The beam flickered across the pond and caught the shape beneath the surface. Human forms, dozens of them, suspended in perfect clarity. Their eyes were open, their mouths were moving, and every single one looked like someone I'd seen in the missing person reports, backpackers, hikers, campers, Jason Reardon among them, Josie too. Their faces pale and waterlogged, as if waiting for someone to join them. Then the reflection changed. Now it was only me. I was underwater, eyes open, smiling. The image leaned closer to the surface until it almost touched mine. Then, through the still water, I saw my reflection's lips move. It spoke one word. Stay. I don't remember how I got back to the truck. My legs moved without thought. My vision tunneled. The air felt heavy, pressing in from all sides. I turned the key, floored it, and tore out of there, gravel spraying behind me like sparks. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, the pond wasn't there anymore. Just a dry basin of cracked earth, no water in sight. The compass needle was spinning wildly again. I pulled over miles later, shaking uncontrollably, trying to breathe. My phone, which hadn't had a signal in hours, suddenly lit up with a notification. One new photo added. I opened the gallery. It was a picture of the pond, taken from the shoreline. The timestamp said it was captured 1 hour in the future. That's when I understood. The disappearances, the patterns, the whispers, they weren't about people getting lost. They were about time folding around the ones who listened, about the wilderness remembering them in every version of itself, like a scar repeating through history. The parks don't take people randomly. They reclaim echoes. Every trail, every stream, every canyon holds memories of those who looked too closely, who stayed too long, who couldn't walk away once the silence started answering back. And now, I'm one of them. The compass has stopped moving. It points always to water, no matter where I go. I've driven across 3 states, and it hasn't changed. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can feel the ground breathing. Sometimes I hear my name whispered through the hum of the tires. Sometimes I see headlights in the mirror that vanish when I blink. I think it's showing me where the others went, or maybe it's showing me where I'm supposed to end up. If you're hearing this, if you're one of those who loves the wild, who believes in solitude and silence, remember this. The land is older than your fear, older than your maps. It listens, it remembers, and sometimes it answers. So when the fog rolls in and the forest grows too quiet, when the air tastes like metal and the water stops moving, when you hear a voice that sounds almost like your own telling you not to be there alone, listen, turn around, and leave something behind that proves you were real. Because if you don't, the park will, and once it remembers your name, it will never forget you again. I don't know why I decided to take the Volkswagen that night. Maybe it was nostalgia or maybe it was guilt. Either way, that decision, the one to drive down to the coast after the storm, became the beginning of something I still can't explain, something that still plays in my head like a tide that never ends. The van was a '79 Westphalia, mustard yellow with rust along the seams, the kind that had more soul than safety. My dad bought it when I was 10. He used to take me and my sister out on weekend trips along the Oregon coast, camping near tide pools, grilling fish over driftwood fires, sleeping to the sound of the waves. It was one of those memories that kept you anchored to something good, until it wasn't. Last year, my sister drowned at a campground near Tillamook. They called it a freak rip current. She'd gone out alone just a few minutes before sunset and never came back. Her body washed up 3 days later, half a mile south, tangled in eelgrass. I couldn't make sense of it. She was the strongest swimmer I knew. I hadn't driven the Volkswagen since her funeral, but last month I got a letter from the campground management. They were reopening after the floods. They'd restored the area, they said, new shoreline barriers, improved drainage, safer parking zones. The tone of it felt sterile, procedural, like they were trying to scrub something out, not just fix it. That's when I decided to go back, to see it for myself, maybe to make peace with it. I left Portland late, around 7 p.m. The sky was still bruised from the storm that had passed through the day before. The roads were damp, the trees dripping. I played old cassette tapes from the glove box, songs my dad used to hum when he drove. It was comforting at first. Then, around the halfway mark, the rain started again. Light at first, then heavier. The windshield wipers groaned. The headlights caught the mist hanging low over the 2-lane highway. By the time I reached the campground, it was almost 10 p.m. The place was empty. At least, it looked that way. No other vehicles, no firelight, just the ocean pounding behind the dunes and the distant flicker of a sodium lamp by the entrance booth. I parked near the same site we used to take as kids, Site 23. It was on a rise, close enough to hear the surf, but far enough to see the whole stretch of beach. I could still picture us there, my sister building driftwood forts, my dad tuning his old guitar, me pretending to be asleep in the van while they talked quietly by the fire. The air smelled of salt and mud and something faintly metallic, like iron after rain. I set up my small lantern, unfolded the van's back bed, and sat for a while, listening to the wind buffet the pop-top canvas. I should have felt calm. Instead, I felt watched. At first, it was just a sense, like someone standing just beyond the tree line. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't the wind or rain. It sounded deliberate, like something knocking against wood. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. I turned off the lantern, waited. The sound stopped. The silence that followed felt thick, like holding your breath underwater. When I finally exhaled, I laughed softly to myself. Maybe it was a loose branch against the picnic table or something shifting in the dunes. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out, and swept the beam around the site. Nothing. Just the empty table, a soaked fire ring, and the wet sand glinting faintly under the light. But then I noticed something strange. Near the edge of the dune, right where the sand dipped toward the beach, there were footprints, bare, small, leading straight down toward the waterline. I felt the first chill then, not from the wind, but from inside. The tracks looked fresh, pressed deep in the damp sand as if someone had just walked by minutes ago. I followed them halfway down before they faded into the smooth, wet surface near the waves. The tide was rising, slow and steady. I stood there for a long moment, the flashlight beam shaking slightly in my hand. The ocean was black, its edges white with foam. Every few seconds, the surf advanced, swallowing another foot of beach. Then, I saw her. For a split second, I thought it was a trick of the light, someone standing waist-deep in the surf, hair clinging to their face, unmoving. My brain refused to register it as real. I blinked hard, wiped the rain from my eyes. She was still there. My mouth went dry. "Hey!" I shouted over the wind. No response. The figure tilted its head slightly, like it was listening. Then it turned and started walking deeper into the water until the waves covered it entirely. I ran forward without thinking, but the cold hit me so hard it felt like a wall. The water was freezing, biting at my legs. I stopped at knee depth, scanning the surface. There was nothing, no splash, no silhouette, just the endless churn of the tide. When I stumbled back up the beach, gasping, the footprints were gone. Washed away. I sat inside the van for what felt like hours, the engine off, the lantern dim. My clothes were soaked, my heartbeat loud enough to drown out the surf. Every so often, I'd think about packing up and leaving, but something in me resisted. I came here to face it, I told myself. Whatever it was. Sometime past midnight, I started hearing the tapping again, but this time it wasn't outside, it was underneath the van. Slow, wet, like fingers drumming on metal. I froze. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. My mind raced through explanations, a loose pipe, dripping rain, maybe an animal, but none of them fit. The rhythm was too precise. I leaned forward, listening. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2. The same pattern as before. I crawled out of the van and crouched low, shining my light underneath. The beam caught the sand, the wet tires, the reflection of water pooling below. Then something moved. A pale hand, half buried in the mud, pressed against the undercarriage. I jerked backward, hitting my head on the bumper. The flashlight tumbled, its beam spinning wildly. When I grabbed it again and pointed back under, the hand was gone. The sand looked untouched. That was when I realized the sound had stopped. Not just the tapping, but everything. The wind, the waves, even the rustle of the dunes. It was like the whole world had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. And in that silence, I heard something else. A whisper, faint, wet, coming from the shoreline. "Come back." It was her voice, my sister's. I didn't move for a long time after that. My flashlight dimmed, the battery giving out. When it finally went dark, I sat there in the silence, too afraid to breathe, too afraid to believe. Then, somewhere in the distance, the surf returned. Soft at first, then growing louder. But the rhythm of it had changed. It no longer came in natural waves. It pulsed, like something breathing beneath the water. I remember thinking that maybe the ocean wasn't done with her, or with me. When I finally slept, it wasn't real sleep. It was that kind of shallow, half-conscious state where the mind starts replaying what it can't accept. I dreamed of the ocean receding far past the horizon, exposing black sand and bones of ships. I saw my sister standing on the wet seabed, her hair weightless, her eyes open. She smiled, but her teeth were full of sand. I woke to the sound of rain hitting metal. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The van smelled of salt and damp fabric. My clothes were still soaked from the night before. When I lifted my head, I saw something written in the condensation on the inside of the window, drawn by a finger. Low tide. My throat tightened. I wiped it away with my sleeve, leaving a smear. The rain outside had softened to a mist. The campground was empty as far as I could see, except for the ranger's truck idling by the entrance. I walked over, still shivering. The ranger was an older man with a face that looked like he'd been carved out of the dunes, creased, weathered, impassive. His name tag read D. Howland. He rolled down the window and gave me a slow look. "You here alone?" he asked. "Yeah, just got in last night." He nodded toward the van. "That yours? Old Volkswagen?" "Yeah, my dad's old one." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You were parked at Site 23? "Yeah, why?" He rubbed his jaw. "Thought we closed that section off last month. Storm tore through, took out half the bluff. You didn't see the sign?" "There was no sign," I said. He looked at me for a long time like he wasn't sure if I was lying or just stupid. "Stay up toward the higher sites," he said finally. "That whole stretch near the beach, ground's not stable. Sand keeps shifting from underneath." I nodded. My mind wasn't on the terrain. It was on that single word, unstable. Something about it felt too fitting. When he drove off, I walked down toward the bluff to look for myself. The path that led to the beach was narrow, carved through dune grass and slick mud. About halfway down, I saw the erosion, sections of the cliff eaten away by the tide. Wooden posts leaned at angles like gravestones. And there, half buried in the sand at the base of the bluff, was something pale and familiar. I climbed down, heart pounding. It was a piece of fiberglass, curved, cracked, with faded blue lettering along the edge. I brushed off the sand. It was from my sister's kayak, the same one she'd taken out the night she drowned. I dropped it like it burned. The tide must have carried it here, I told myself. Things wash ashore all the time, but the logical part of me, the one that had always clung to reason, was starting to slip. Because last night, I'd seen her in that same stretch of water. Back at the van, I packed up to move to a higher site. I chose one near the tree line, away from the open beach. The forest here felt denser, more enclosed. The air smelled of cedar and rot. The rain turned to drizzle, then stopped. By late afternoon, the clouds began to thin. The ocean, visible through gaps in the trees, had a metallic sheen. I thought about leaving, just getting back on the highway and not looking back, but something inside me kept me there. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was curiosity, guilt, and something darker. That night, the tapping returned, but this time it came from inside. I'd been sitting in the van, engine off, staring at the waves through the windshield when it began, a faint knock from the rear hatch. Slow, deliberate, like someone testing the lock. I turned in my seat, heart in my throat. 3 knocks. Pause. 2. I crawled to the back and pressed my ear against the panel. Silence. Then a single tap, lighter than before, like a fingertip against glass. I flicked on the lantern. The condensation had returned to the inside windows, glistening in the orange light. As I watched, a line appeared, drawn by an unseen hand. A circle, then a smaller one inside it, then another. Ripples. My hands shook. I grabbed the blanket and wiped it off, trying to steady my breathing. "Stop," I whispered. "Please stop." The lantern flickered. For a moment, the light caught something in the reflection, just behind me in the glass. A face. I spun around. Nothing. The van felt smaller by the second, the air thick with moisture. I slid open the door and stepped out into the cold. The wind had died completely. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic pulse of the surf. The tide had come in higher than before, licking at the base of the trees. It shouldn't have reached that far. Something moved in the waterline. A figure, half submerged, crawling through the shallows on hands and knees. I froze. The moonlight caught the back of its neck, its soaked hair. My chest went tight. "Sarah?" I said before I could stop myself. The figure turned. The face that looked up at me wasn't hers. It was wrong. Waterlogged, skin gray blue, eyes like empty sockets reflecting the light. Its mouth opened, and what came out wasn't speech. It was a sound like air leaving a flooded room. I stumbled backward, tripped over a root, hit the ground. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. The tide crept higher still, whispering over the sand. I backed toward the van, my mind racing. Maybe I'd fallen asleep again. Maybe it was another dream. But the prints in the wet earth were real, handprints deep and uneven, leading up from the water. That's when I saw the lantern inside the van flicker again, just once. Then a shadow moved across it. Someone was inside. I didn't think. I ran forward, yanked open the door, ready to shout. The van was empty. But the backseat was wet, drenched, as if someone had climbed in from the ocean. Water pooled beneath the cushions. The blanket I'd left folded was soaked through, and on the inside of the window, written in smeared condensation, were 4 words. Low tide. She waits. I stood there, the cold crawling up my spine. The sound of the waves filled everything. They were closer now, louder, the same pulse I'd heard in my dreams. And underneath it all, faint but steady, came the knocking again. This time not from metal, from below, the ground itself. I dropped to my knees, pressing my palm to the damp earth beneath the van. I could feel it, a vibration, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. And then the whisper came again, close enough to feel against my ear. Come back. I stumbled backward, falling into the sand. The tide surged, flooding past my feet, swallowing the tracks. I scrambled into the van and slammed the door shut, locking it even though I knew locks didn't matter anymore. The knocking grew louder, matching the rhythm of my pulse. The engine refused to start. I turned the key again and again until it caught with a groan, sputtering like a dying thing. The headlights cut through the mist for a brief moment, and in that light, I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, standing along the waterline, motionless. Some were missing arms, some leaned at odd angles. All were staring straight at me. I slammed the gas. The tires spun in the wet sand before catching. The van lurched forward, headlights shaking, spray hitting the windshield like rain. I didn't look back. Not once. Not until the tide had disappeared behind me. I drove until the trees blurred together and the rain became a smear on the windshield. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the van on the road. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every curve in the forest seemed to breathe. I didn't stop until I saw a dim light through the fog, a gas station at the edge of a small coastal town. The place looked half abandoned. One pump, a flickering neon sign that said, open, but looked like it was lying. I pulled up beside the pump and killed the engine. For a long time, I just sat there, forehead against the steering wheel, listening to the ticking sound of the cooling engine. When I finally got out, the smell of salt was still on me, heavier than it should have been. The air here was quiet, too still for a coastal morning. I went inside. The clerk looked up from behind the counter. She was in her 60s, gray hair tied back, wearing a red jacket with the town's name stitched on it, Nethart's Bay. She gave me a polite smile, then frowned when she saw my face. You all right, honey? She asked. I hesitated. I was camping up near Tillamook Head. The storm came in, and I stopped. How was I supposed to explain it? The drowned campground, the whispering tide, the figures, the van still dripping salt water even though it hadn't touched the waves in hours. You came from the state park? She asked quietly. Yeah. Site 23. Her expression changed. The smile vanished. She reached for something under the counter, a pack of cigarettes maybe, but her hand was trembling. That section's closed, she said. Should have been for a while now. That's what the ranger said, I murmured. He said the ground was unstable. She nodded slowly, eyes distant. Unstable. That's one word for it. What do you mean? She didn't answer right away. The only sound was the humming of the old fridge behind her. Finally, she said, You know what the tide does up there? It doesn't just come in and go out. It moves under the ground. It pulls through the sand like veins under skin. The land's been sinking for years. People think it's erosion. But locals, she paused, looked me straight in the eye. Locals say it's something older. I felt the chill again, deep and spreading. Older? She leaned closer. That whole stretch used to be part of a fishing village. Late 1800s, a storm wiped it out, took every house, every boat. They say the tide didn't drown them all at once. It took them slow, pulled them into the mud one by one. When the water went back, the land looked the same. But it wasn't. I could barely breathe. Bodies never stayed buried there, she went on. Every time the land shifts, they come up again. People see things, hear things. The state calls it subsidence. We call it memory. I stared at her, the hum of the lights starting to pulse in my ears like a slow heartbeat. I saw something, I whispered. Someone. She didn't flinch. Then you should leave before the next low tide. I turned back toward the door. My reflection in the glass looked older somehow, drained. As I stepped outside, I heard her call after me. Whatever you think you lost out there, don't go back to find it. The tide doesn't give back what it takes. The engine hesitated, but finally caught. I pulled out of the station and headed inland. For the first few miles, I kept glancing in the mirrors, expecting to see those figures again in the mist. The trees closed in overhead, dripping rain like tears. But the farther I got from the coast, the heavier the air became inside the van. The windshield fogged even though the heater was off. A thin layer of moisture crept up from the floorboards. The salt smell returned, sharp and cold. I rolled down the window, but it only grew stronger. Then the radio, long dead, crackled to life. Static at first, then faint whispers beneath it, too low to understand. I turned the dial, but it wouldn't change frequency. The sound grew clearer, shaping into a rhythm. 3 taps. Pause. 2. I slammed it off. My pulse pounded in my ears. The van began to shudder as I climbed a steep stretch of road. The engine made a deep groaning sound, then coughed and died. I rolled to a stop near a turnout overlooking the ocean below, a gray strip of water through the fog. I stepped out, letting the cold wind hit me, trying to think. My boots crunched on gravel. That's when I noticed it. The road beneath my feet was damp. Not from rain, from salt water. A small stream was trickling out from under the van, clear and cold. I crouched down, touched it. It smelled like the ocean. I opened the back hatch. The blankets were soaked again, even though I'd dried them that morning. A pool of water rippled on the floor, faintly glowing in the dim light. I reached toward it and felt the ground shift. The gravel cracked softly. The air went still. Then, from somewhere deep below, came a low sound, like the exhale of something enormous. I staggered back. The water in the van pulsed once, twice, then went still again. When I looked up, the fog over the ocean had changed. It was rising, pulling upward in long, twisting columns like smoke. I could see movement within it, shapes that seemed to walk, then dissolve. And through that haze, faint but unmistakable, came a woman's voice. Low tide. It was my sister's voice. I backed away, heart racing until my legs hit the guardrail. "Sarah?" I said, barely a whisper. Something answered, not in words, but in motion. The tide below drew back fast, pulling the waves far from shore, exposing black, glistening sand. In the center of that retreating water was a dark shape, a circle, then another. Ripples spreading outward, glowing faintly like phosphorescent veins, the same pattern she'd drawn on the van's window. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and decay. My eyes burned. The sound of the sea grew louder, deeper, as if it were breathing in. And I finally understood what the ranger meant about the ground being unstable. It wasn't erosion. It was hunger. The land was breathing with the tide. I stumbled into the driver's seat, slamming the door. The radio came on again, unprompted. Through the static, I heard the same voice, my sister's, calm, quiet, and wrong. "Come back." The water from the back seat surged forward, spilling over the floor, rising past my ankles. I turned the key. The engine shrieked, then caught with a roar. The van lurched forward, tires throwing spray. I didn't care where I was going as long as it wasn't down. The road twisted upward through the forest. Branches clawed at the roof. The van shook, headlights cutting through fog that looked almost solid. Behind me, I could hear it, the rumble of the tide chasing the shore, surging back in. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not until the sound faded, replaced by the slow patter of rain on metal. When I finally stopped, the sky was turning pale with dawn. I was miles inland, parked beside a logging road. The forest was quiet. The air still smelled faintly of salt, but the moisture had stopped seeping in. I got out and stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. The ocean was gone, just the whisper of wind through the trees. When I finally dared to open the back hatch, the blankets were dry, the floor clean, no sign of water, no ripples, no message, just the hollow smell of sea air that lingered in the van's old upholstery. I leaned against the door and closed my eyes. I wanted to believe it was over, that it had all been some grief-soaked hallucination. But then I heard something soft beneath me. A single knock. Then two. And when I looked down at the van's side panel, the paint was still wet. Salt water dripping, tracing faint circles that spread and faded like a tide pulling away. Maybe the woman at the gas station was right. The tide doesn't give back what it takes. But maybe, sometimes it remembers who came looking.